Hi, Glenkirk Church, friends and family. As we prepare to reopen on Sunday, June 14th, we are working hard to put measures in place to provide a worship experience that's meaningful, that's glorifying to Jesus, and that complies with all current public health requirements. And as we work to prepare, I want to invite you to work to begin preparing your heart for when you feel comfortable to come and to re-engage in in-person worship. Here at Glenkirk, we have a variety of different perspectives among our people about this public health crisis. And we all have different comfort zones when it comes to re-engaging being around groups of people. And so as we prepare to reopen, let's begin preparing our hearts for worshiping with people whose perspectives and whose comfort zone may be different than our own. You know, throughout the history of the Christian church, there have been certain topics in the Bible that are called disputable matters. These disputable matters are topics that the Bible doesn't really directly address, telling us what to believe or what to do. Paul discusses these disputable matters in the New Testament at length in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and in Romans chapter 14. Back then, these disputable matters included whether it was okay to eat food that had previously been involved in a pagan ritual, and which day of the week was best to gather for worship, and so on. And a person's convictions back then about these disputable matters were often a result of their own unique story and their own circumstances. For example, a Christian who had participated in pagan rituals with food before they became a Christian might have very different convictions than Christians who didn't come from that kind of background. Well, I think it's fair to say that our convictions about this public health crisis fall under this same category of disputable matters. And our convictions about this public health crisis are a product of our own unique story and our own unique circumstances. Situations and circumstances that other people wouldn't know about us unless they get to know us well enough to hear our story. So to prepare our hearts for beginning to re-engage in in-person worship on June 14th and beyond, I want to mention 4 important principles about disputable matters, 2 from 1 Corinthians 8 and 2 from Romans chapter 12, that can help us begin to prepare our hearts for worshiping together once again. First, in disputable matters, loving each other is more important than what we know. Loving each other is more important than what we know. 1 Corinthians 8:1 says, "Knowledge puffs up, while love builds up." Now, don't get me wrong, knowledge is good. I'm a learner, so I love knowledge. But I also know that when I focus on knowledge, when it comes to one of these disputable matters, that knowledge can puff me up and feed my pride. And that pride, in turn, can poison my relationships with other Christians that look at that disputable matter differently than I look at it. So when it comes to these disputable matters, love is more important than knowledge. The second principle, in disputable matters, protecting each other is more important than exercising our rights. Protecting each other more important than exercising our rights. 1 Corinthians 8:8 says, "Be careful that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block for someone else." Our faith in Jesus leads us to experience many freedoms that we have the rights and the ability to express. But not everyone experiences those freedoms in exactly the same way. So it's important that our freedoms don't set the agenda for our relationships with each other. In fact, later in this very chapter, Paul will say that he makes himself a servant of others, not because he has to, but because he wants to. He wants to protect other people to build them up instead of tear them down. Because for the Christian, when it comes to these disputable matters, protecting each other is a higher priority than our personal rights. The third principle, in disputable matters, accepting other people's perspectives is more important than proving that we're right. Accepting the perspectives of other people. This one from Romans chapter 14, verse 1, Paul says, accept those whose faith is more fragile than your faith, without arguing over disputable matters. And then later in the chapter, in verse 7, he says, do not treat each other with contempt when it comes to these disputable matters. Arguing for our own opinions is a kind of national pastime in our culture today, especially with the advent of social media, but also in person. And there's certainly a time and a place for a good, spirited conversation. But when it comes to these disputable matters, accepting the fact that there are multiple perspectives can help us preserve relationships instead of tearing them down. It's possible for us to hold to our own convictions and yet at the very same time to accept people whose convictions are different than our own. Finally, in disputable matters, taking personal responsibility is more important than blaming people. Taking personal responsibility for our own actions. Romans chapter 14, verse 19, Paul urges each and every one of us with these words, make every effort to do what leads to peace and mutual edification. Rather than focusing on how other people might fall short of this, Paul addresses each of us as individuals to take personal responsibility for our own actions to promote peace among God's people and to build one another up when it comes to these disputable matters. I believe these 4 principles can help us reopen well. When we start meeting in person again, some will feel that the measures that we've taken for public health are excessive and unnecessary, while others will feel that they don't go nearly far enough. Some will feel comfortable coming on June 14th, while others will not yet feel comfortable being around groups of people. And this is where our commitment to love one another, to protect one another, to accept each other's perspectives, and to take personal responsibility for ourselves will become vitally important. For those not yet comfortable joining in-person worship because they're in an at-risk category or live with someone in an at-risk category, or they're just not quite ready to be around groups of people yet, let's accept that person's decision and support them without judgment and without pressure. For those who do join us in public worship, when you're asked to do things like wearing a cloth face mask or keeping a 6-foot distance from others, let's do these things out of love for other people, regardless of how we might personally feel about those measures. I believe that we can reopen well, not just in our leadership's planning, but also in how we treat each other in our relationships. I am committed to that, and I hope you are as well. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.